Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being here with us this evening. I hope you all had a wonderful spring break, which probably feels like a long time ago now. Nonetheless, I hope it was a much needed and good rest for you. I'd like to share the following land acknowledgement before we begin. LACMA recognizes that we occupy land in Los Angeles County, originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Kizh, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of the lands and waters in Los Angeles County. And I just want to acknowledge that I am currently at LACMA's campus, which is on Tongva land. We can go to the next slide. Thank you again so much for being here, everyone. We're back this evening with our third and final Educator Speaker Series program of the school year, featuring visual art and social justice educator Alisha Mernick, who will be showing you how to center cultural heritage and draw on cultural funds of knowledge in your classrooms tonight. The program will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube in the coming weeks, and we also have a live captioner here today. You can either access the captions by clicking on the button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar that says captions. That's usually at the bottom of your screen, or you can click the link in the chat, which I am putting in the chat right now. So that's if you want to view the captions in a separate window. Sometimes it's convenient that way. And for those of you participating tonight for professional development hours, please stick around to the end. That's when I will share the survey link, which also doubles as a sign-in sheet for you. So PD folks, we got you. Just stay till the end and we'll send you the link. Okay, next slide. I'm super excited to share that on May 29th, we will be having our final Evenings for Educators program of the school year. Please join us for an evening of presentations, hands-on workshops, food, community, and of course, lots of art. We will be looking at Ed Ruscha Now Then, which is a fantastic retrospective. I finally went and saw it today, of the LA artist's work that explores his interest in pop culture, the entertainment industry, and the ever-changing landscape of our beloved Los Angeles. Tickets are available at LACMA.org, and they're kind of going quicker than usual, so be sure to get yours sooner than rather than later. Again, tickets are available at LACMA.org, and we would love to see you there. That's Wednesday, May 29th from 4:30 to 8 p.m. And now I will go ahead and introduce our presenter. Alisha Mernick, pronoun she, her, is an award-winning, nationally recognized visual art and social justice educator based in Los Angeles. She has over 15 years of classroom teaching experience, as well as an extensive history of professional service and activism related to equity, diversity, and inclusion in the field of art education. Alisha currently teaches art education courses at the California State University and serves as president-elect for the California Art Education Association. Her teaching practice, publications, advocacy, and lectures advance art education as an ideal space to engage students in a critical analysis of issues of identity, social justice, and civic engagement. Welcome, Alisha. I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Okay, I need to do my screen share. Beautiful. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm going to hide this. Thank you for joining me on a weekday after working. It's really giving a lot, and special shout out to my friends in the room for coming to support me. Love that. Thank you. I have to start today just by acknowledging that right now it feels like the whole world is on fire. It's interesting with the topic of today's presentation. I actually only yesterday kind of finally got a hold of my family in Iran, and everyone's okay so far. There's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, but as my mom put it, what are you going to do? It's life. It's been like this for 40 years. I think families across the Middle East are in pain, are losing loved ones, and Palestinians are experiencing what I can only imagine feels like an apocalypse. As an ethnically Jewish, Iranian, religiously Muslim person, I'm feeling a lot of pain, and it has been very hard to focus. That said, I find a lot of comfort in this concept of spheres of influence, this idea that we need to commit to doing what we can, where we can, and, committing to doing what we can within the spaces that we are in. And for me, that space is the classroom. So I commit to nonviolent education, anti-bias education, pro-love and liberation and justice education. And I commit to creating spaces in my classroom for students to process the world they see and imagine that the world that they want. I hope that all the educators in the room will make similar commitments with me, to just allow for spaces like this, kind of recognizing the humanity and the distractions of the folks coming together in your learning communities, because this has been a hard week, hard several months. Okay, so my agenda today, we are here to talk about culturally sustaining teaching, culturally sustaining pedagogy. So I'm going to start with a quick acknowledgement of what the need is for this type of teaching. I'll go into, definitions, terms, academia, and then we'll get to actually look at some contemporary Iranian art and the classroom implications for this. In establishing the need for this work, I'll first mention that I have a whole full-hour workshop I've done on decentering whiteness in art education, and that's available on the LACMA YouTube channel. So you can, maybe we can add like a click here. But I do recommend that just as a broader introduction to the need. So the need, this idea that the centering of European and white American art and culture and education is very widespread and well documented. One of the core goals of American art ed is to appreciate and emulate the art and design of Europe. This is built into our textbooks, curricular resources, and in many states, the standards themselves. More than just the centering of white male artists, we also see Eurocentric design language, materials, techniques, aesthetics, and art theory. We see Eurocentricity manifested not only in the content of what we teach as fine art, high arts, the masterpieces, the canon, but we also see that Eurocentricity centered in our classroom culture and in the ways that we teach. Dr. Richard Reddick has a really fantastic lecture for the LBJ libraries about the history of this, the history of public education and its relationship to colonization and capitalism. So I start with this because one of the core tenets of culturally sustaining pedagogy, which is the umbrella theory for today's presentation, is the idea that we need to start by acknowledging this. We need to start with this understanding that public schools have really existed in order to assimilate to a culture of professionalism, a culture of productivity, et cetera, and that those cultural values and expectations are very much tied to white American cultural norms. Some of the earliest tuition-free public schools were the boarding schools created with the explicit intention to assimilate Indigenous children into white American culture. And if that is news to you, if you're interested in this, I recommend looking up the phrase, "Kill the Indian and save the man." Our students have been asked to learn a certain type of language, certain type of way of using that language, certain behaviors in the classroom. Certain cultures are held up as higher and more worthy of study than others. I remember joking with a 10th grade history teacher at one of the high school that I taught at, about how her world history class was even called a world history class when 95% of what was included was European history. and American history. So this centering is very clear, and culturally sustaining teaching acknowledges and confirms this history of intent so that it can position itself as one remedy to this cultural erasure that happens. So cultural sustaining pedagogy as an alternative, as a remedy, works towards cultural pluralism in a multicultural society. That is the coexistence of multiple distinct cultures. It sees learning as additive rather than subtractive, as critically enriching strengths and assets rather than replacing deficits. It positions cultural dexterity as a necessary good. This extends to allowing for multiple ways of being in the classroom. It allows for multiple ways of speaking and languages in the classroom, the arts and culture that we include in the classroom. It also includes these deeper cultural qualifiers like the ideologies and value systems that we use, how important timeliness is, how important being still is, how important eye contact is. And it encourages you to question how much of that itself is a monocultural understanding of what a good student looks like. So it builds culturally sustaining pedagogy, builds on Hammond's culturally responsive pedagogy or culturally responsive teaching. And it centers a lot of the same core understanding that culture is deep. It goes beyond decoration and artifacts and includes deeper elements such as worldview, core beliefs, spiritualities, social norms, value systems, behaviors, etc. It requires that we get to know and lovingly embrace, radically accept and lovingly embrace our students' deep cultures and those different ways of being and knowing. Truly accepting and supporting these different value systems and even ways of behaving in our classrooms. Zaretta Hammond herself has written about the need for new language and frameworks around her work because of the way that she sees her original theory of culturally responsive teaching having become watered down as it was mainstreamed. One explicit distinguishing feature of this new framework is the shift from viewing culture as a bridge towards viewing culture as innately valuable and sustaining, as in the culture sustains us. Instead of asking, how can we use our students' cultures to make desired knowledge more relevant and accessible? Culturally sustaining pedagogy asks, how can schools support students in exploring, honoring, questioning, and sustaining multiple ways of knowing and being in the world? My lectures, I guess is what this is, usually include some kind of reflection. And today, since we are virtual, I would love if you could consider this for a moment and actually share a little bit in the chat. But I would love for folks to reflect on how we have typically seen culture included in schools and classrooms. Has it been as a bridge? Has it been a sustenance? Maybe a little of both? Has it been mostly surface culture, or have there been some of those deeper ideologies and values embraced? So just take a moment to reflect and add your thoughts in the chat. So I'll read out some of these responses. Typically surface culture, in its designated month, of course. Haha. I've typically seen culture included in schools only by language and its surface, the surface cultures. Food, flags, and fashion. It's funny. Unfortunately, very surface. I see it as surface or just not at all. Family projects where kids share aspects of their own. Monthly events. So single projects or special events, monthly events. There are these moments of giving students permission to bring their culture into the classroom. And as a bridge, typically a bridge to raise test scores and attendance. For sure. So I think kind of the underlining understanding here that I would love for folks to take away is this idea that when we use culture as a bridge, it's still maintaining and supporting a hierarchy of what we deem the desired knowledge. And that when we use when we use culture with the intention of just, I just want to make this lesson on the elements and principles of design a little bit more cultural, it's not, the intention there is kind of coloring your children's experience in the classroom. So culturally sustaining pedagogies also support students in developing a little bit of a critical understanding of the ways in which schools have endangered traditional lifeways and have attempted to assimilate. It asks us to go beyond celebrating diversity and helps students see the real threat of erasure. It creates opportunities for students to see and problematize the oppressive forces in their lives, especially in their own schooling environments. And the intention for this is not just to bum kids out about how sad the world is. It is to inoculate our students against these attempted erasures. It is to inoculate them, to let them know that it can happen, that it is happening. So culturally sustaining pedagogy positions that this critical lens is really necessary to sustaining any cultural pluralism in a society, because the movement towards monoculture, that pressure towards monoculture, is present in every society. In American culture, it's very intentional and targeted. All right. So again, the biggest critique of critical pedagogies is this is a bummer. Like, why are we just talking about erasure and sadness and the hierarchies of culture and this doesn't feel fun. How is this going to be fun for my kids? So I love this question. How can we provide spaces for students to be critical of society, yet also imagine and enact a world of joy beyond the intersecting oppressions that attempt to circumscribe their lives? The role of the arts is paramount here. So I'd love for folks to think about this a little bit, about how you have fostered criticality, this invitation to be critically aware of the world that we live in. And how might we do this while maintaining some hope and joyfulness and dreaming? Again, in the chat, if you're able. How have I fostered criticality in the classroom? Love that. So through art, we can imagine what doesn't exist in a concrete and tangible way. Encouraging students to create art that reflects their own lived experiences. Very joyful. Oh, we can put hearts on things now. Incorporating the culture of my students first into art lessons and then introducing others so that they can relate. Allowing students to name themselves, their identities, and celebrate their resistance to the norms. I love that. Studying art from many different cultures. Discussing the culture without sugarcoating and how the arts have given people hope and beauty of the art created. I like using VTS, visual thinking strategies, with students when we observe different artworks. Great. So that kind of student-driven dialogue. So I want to introduce you to a few Iranian artists who really play that role for me. They do the thing. They teach me criticality. They encourage me to think critically about the world that I'm in. And it's joyful. It makes me happy. It makes me proud to see how my roots are included in these works. So I'm going to introduce you to just a few contemporary Iranian artists, again, who have developed my criticality around issues of erasure in particular, and have also really energized me to learn more about my own cultural heritage and to feel proud of the beauty and brilliance and strength within that heritage. All right. This is probably my favorite. So Shadi Gadarian's Qajar series is now untitled within the LACMA archives, but so this series are probably my favorite Iranian contemporary artworks because they are so silly. They find a way to make strong critical statements while still centering humor and playfulness. Each of these works juxtaposes traditional symbology with modern elements. So symbols of Iranian women's strength, confidence, curiosity, intelligence, and combining that with a color scheme, a set, and costuming that draws back to, another time. The Iran that my mom grew up in was nothing like today. In urban Tehran in the 60s and 70s, most of the 70s, women were doctors, lawyers, teachers. They were wearing mini skirts and French bob haircuts, dancing a rock and roll. But they were still very much in love with ancient Persian culture, ancient Persian art and poetry and fabric and dance. I always saw that in my own mother. I always saw this walking of a line between loving our Zoroastrian Sufi roots, and also, she has an advanced degree. She's a professional. She's an incredibly opinionated woman. I think all of that is really summed up in this central image where we have the woman in hijab, but still holding the boombox with a hand on her hip, just being loud, being confident, being opinionated, it very much runs in the family. Asad Falwell paints these decorative floral arabesques, reminiscent of Islamic art. These serve as the armature for cutout black and white press photos of key figures within the turbulent social and political history of the Middle East. And head nod to LACMA for writing that text. So again, I see this engagement with contemporary political satire, as well as the sustaining of traditional Persian art making materials and techniques. So looking at these works and a lot of other contemporary Iranian artists, I've learned a lot about the materials and techniques and aesthetics that are core to our visual language. And I've learned to really embrace the importance of cultural critique, right? These folks are obviously not making art in Iran like this. You could absolutely get executed for making this in art. You can get arrested for dancing in Iran right now. But these works really represent that even within that threat, that danger, that the critique is important, right? I also love these works for how jumbled up they are. I think Iranian American identity, like many diasporic identities, is really complicated. It's really confusing. It's a lot to juggle and balance. And so I love the visual metaphor here of everything sort of toppling over and being piled up. Shireen Neshat, maybe the most well-known of satirical Iranian artists, she ruminates on the ways that Iran changed after the conservative Islamic revolution in the 1970s. For context, because I know a lot of what brings folks here today is this specific focus on Iranian art, the Islamic revolution, what we call that today, actually started as a student-led movement to replace an oppressive, mostly Western-backed puppet government with a newly democratically elected government. There was this intention to, it was mostly student-led, it was mostly the kids. There was this intention to overthrow this strict and oppressive regime and replace it with something more truly democratic. During the unrest that started in this revolution, the hyper-religious conservative right took advantage of the national discontent with the West's imperialism and influence and financial oppression, and advocated instead for this return to the golden age of Iran instead of a progress forward. It was sort of like a "Let's make Iran great again" campaign. We saw religious conservatives, the mullahs, like distributing audio cassettes of extremist lectures to the undereducated rural population. And when it came time for a democratic vote, theocracy won. So the parallels between this history and the more recent American extremism, neo-nationalism, it's striking. I first started really getting concerned about these parallels when the Tea Party was getting formed, and it has only gotten more stressful. It really, truly keeps me up at night. One of the one of the perks of being a diaspora kid, of being a child of people who fled, an autocratic revolution, is that I've never felt like it can't happen here. I've never had that feeling. I have been raised by a mother who saw her entire world change, who hasn't been back to her home country in 40 years. I I was saying earlier in the acknowledgements to this session, it was hard to even get a hold of my family in Iran this week because they just like cut the internet off anytime that there's political discontent. The reality of what can happen when we don't embrace criticality and freedom dreaming in our classrooms and in our lives and our worlds, that reality is so visceral for me. And I think Shirin Neshat's work is one of the most evocative avenues to feeling that fear and that horror. I remember her writing about the way that she wanted to work in black and white because she felt like the color had been stripped from her world, like the color had been stripped from the streets of Iran. It feels very real. So in undergrad, as an art major with a painting focus, all of the available mentors to me at school worked in oil or acrylic. And, you know, I had been raised to love Van Gogh and I want to paint just like that. And it became an obsession of mine to do something different. You know, like any alternative kid of the 90s, I wanted to break out of the box. So I became curious about Islamic art and Persian arts and teaching myself these techniques. This was pre-good internet, and so this meant scouring libraries for print reproductions of paintings I could study, technical texts on gouache and gold leaf, and eventually finding a lovely Jewish American woman in Long Island who could teach me the art of illumination, the gold leafing. I chose to become interested in this you know, out of I want to be different, I want to be unique. I remember I had an art teacher who said, Alisha, like your drawing technical skills are really fantastic, but I don't see you in your work at all. And this is the direction I went to try to include myself in my work. But one of the reasons that I went towards myself, went towards my heritage, was I was starting to get a little angry. I was starting to get a little angry. I had, you know, it wasn't until college when I studied critical race theory, again, buzzword. It wasn't until college when I started studying and being able to name the assimilation and oppression that I had experienced in my youth that I was able to even understand what it was. So this image on the right, these are all works that I created. The image on the right is it's a recent work of Punch Needle, and it depicts my young preschool class photo. This was my first year in the American public school system, and this was the point where I first really began to experience erasure and began to feel embarrassed about who I was. When I was very, very young, my pediatrician told our mother not to teach me Farsi because it might slow me down in learning English in school. Entering the public school system, my body, my habits, my hair, my body hair, my lunches, the smells of my clothes, my mom's thick accent, all of it suddenly became a target. And I was bullied throughout grade school for these things. Post 9/11, the teasing and ostracizing only became more overt. And by high school, I was doing my best to assimilate and take advantage of my part-time ability to pass as white. In college, when I started reading all of these theories and really understanding that what had happened to me was erasure, I made a commitment that when I started teaching, I would do better. I would not erase who my kids were. And so this brings us to the classroom implications chunk of what I wanted to talk about today. As a teacher, I just don't want to do this to my kids. I want to acknowledge that it has probably already happened to many of my students to some extent. And I want to create a space and opportunity for students to reconnect with who they are and see their heritage and cultures as equal and worthy of study. I want them to sustain their cultures and also feel this very lovely thing that I felt when I started doing this, where your culture then sustains you. It starts to feed you. It starts to give you fuel and energy. So what does this actually look like in my classroom? This looks like including lots and lots of culturally sustaining contemporary artists from many different backgrounds, but primarily from the backgrounds of my students in the classroom. I include lots of artists who explicitly center their own identity in their work, their own heritage, use traditional materials, techniques, culturally specific aesthetic approaches, etc. In doing all of this, again, I'd love if folks haven't seen the Decentering Whiteness in Art Education lecture to go back to this, because there really are helpful and harmful ways to include diverse artists in the classroom. I also design all of my projects. Every single art project that I do in my class allows for some kind of personal expression and the tapping of individual funds of knowledge that could be celebrated and recognized in the work that my students make. This often means that I write projects with a little choice about materials, subject matter, and aesthetics. I'm kind of moderate on that choice spectrum, right? I care about theme, I care about big idea, I care about concept. And I want students to learn skills, and I want students to develop some criticality. So, I didn't include it in this slideshow, but I drew this like Venn diagram that I show my ed students. Like I've got my like content goals. I've got my so my content goals, like technical content goals, my thematic big idea goals, and my criticality goals, the area where I can do that culturally sustaining thing, where I'm developing their criticality about the world that we live in and giving them opportunities to bring their own cultures, their own funds of knowledge in as equal. I also make a point to, this criticality point. Like, I really work on this a lot. Every single project that I do has a criticality objective. And I scaffold it over the course of the year to develop and deepen, so that by the end of the year, my students are making very sophisticated, reflective, challenging works of art. Again, I could go on and on about that for another hour, but I instead will recommend that you look it up. I wrote an article about it. I have resources about that also. But that scaffolding of criticality I find really, really important. Instead of a single unit or a single project that attempts to help students be more critical about a single issue, it is a spiraled curriculum that really deepens and continues to develop that mindset. All right, and lastly, though maybe most importantly, is I really try to remember that our classrooms are a microcosm of the world. And I want to run my classroom. I don't want to run my classroom. I want to create a classroom that is the world that I want to see, not the world that we're in. So I want it to be collaborative. I want it to be safe. I want it to be comfortable. I want it to be warm. I want it to be joyful. I really try to remember that the content of my lessons is not as important as the experience that students have and the experience that they walk away with. So we have a lot of opportunities to chat and connect. We have, at the beginning of the year, instead of handing people rules that I've created ahead of time, we do the contracting exercise. So we co-create the classroom norms. And we post it up, and I help hold kids accountable to it, but it really is norms that they have created. There's a ton of peer support. There's a ton of peer feedback, and I scaffold that too. I introduce the the language of respectful critique and Socratic seminar sentence frames and all of those tools. Students need to relearn how to communicate as equals. Students need to relearn how to make decisions a lot of the times, to make decisions for themselves instead of asking us, like, is this right? Is this good? Is this meeting the objective? I have a lot of students writing their own objective. So we'll do an intro lesson together and then they write their own objective for that class day. So all of this really is inspired by this total rejection of authoritarianism in the classroom, this rejection of, I don't want to be a fascist. And so I'm very self-critical about the moments when I am. And I will say for the first 2 or 3 years of thinking this way and wanting to reshape my, I read Pedagogy of the Oppressed and I wanted to be just like Frary and I wanted to, be a facilitator, not a banking model teacher. When I discovered all of this, those first couple of years were rough because I just felt like a jerk the whole time. But it got easier and we got to a place where I can definitely manage expectations and measure learning and assess students transparently and fairly with rigor. But I am not a dictator. So the work that comes out of this, I apologize. I copy and pasted this slide from another presentation. So sorry if you've already seen all of these. But these are student works from the high school that I taught at. And the work is great. If I can say so myself. But some common themes that students become interested in over the course of the year and choose for their final are bicultural identity, media stereotypes about parts of identity, identity-based bias in the justice system, the migrant experience, the tension of mixed heritages. They look at social issues like police brutality, the racist history of policing, women's rights, bodily autonomy, gender roles, geopolitical issues. It's broad. And these are all examples of the final project that we do in the class. Oh, no, it's not. These are mostly examples of the final project that we do in the class after that scaffolding of criticality throughout the year. The only exceptions to that are this, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the immigration counter-narrative portraits. This is a project we did looking at political cartoons and excerpts from campaign speeches that help students recognize what the dominant narrative about immigration is in our country. And then I invited students to create a portrait and write an artist statement countering that. So creating an artwork that would serve as a counter narrative to these negative dominant master narratives. So students had to choose a real life immigrant. They wrote their interview questions. They interviewed the individual. They still learned portraiture and color mixing and monochromatic tone matching. And they created these beautiful portraits. They wrote artist statements that talked about how this individual broke all of those stereotypes. The kind of culmination of all of this was we did have an exhibit that coincided with an immigrant rights fair. So we found this event happening. We offered to bring our images. We, of course, had to block out all the names because there were so many, students writing about the issues with being undocumented. So they were able to get this out there. They were able to show the world kind of like the beauty of these people, these family members, and write about their hard work and innovation and what giving parents they were, in a way that was joyful, in a way that was celebratory. And the bottom right one is not from our final project. This was a visual culture project. It was called Advertising Addiction. So we looked at American advertisements. We talked about the ideologies that were present in the advertising that we saw. We charted that. We I asked them what was missing, what ideologies and values are not included. And then the invitation was just to create an artwork that appropriated and recontextualized recognizable advertising imagery and brands in order to create a work of satirical art about American visual culture. So sounds crazy advanced. I did this with 9th graders. It just had a ton of scaffolding. All right, so ideology. I love this word. I found this word like opened new compartments in my brain and heart when I learned it. I think a lot about ideology in the classroom, and what I was sharing earlier about the ways that we center white American capitalistic norms as the definition of good behavior in our classrooms. I thought about how do I do that first? And yes, I do work on that, you know. And then I thought about how does my own deep culture impact my classroom culture and pedagogy? So yes, I am American. I grew up here. I was pretty assimilated. I've internalized a lot of it, and I know that I'm doing it to my students. But what else is there, right? And is there a different ideology, a different cultural value system that I can center instead? Again, I think this is the heart of my presentation, so I'll go over my examples, and then I will ask you all to reflect and do the same. Here's what I learned. I really wanted to consider the ways I model cultural sustenance in the classroom. What are the ways that my own culture informs my ways of being in community with my students? And I thought about these Iranian and even older, like, I don't even want to say Iranian, these Persian ideologies that really shape who I am and how I exist in the world. And I wanted to think about how do these impact my teaching? So the first concept I thought of was Azadi. Azadi is it's actually an older Sanskrit word for freedom or liberty, and it became momentarily popular with the woman life freedom movement. The Jin Jayan Azadi phrase resonated around the world, and people learned this word. But I think of this word, and I think liberty, right? The liberation from freedom. This really shapes the way that I view power in my classroom and my desire to share power with students. The next concept that felt very core to me is imani, faith. So my faith, my family is Sufi, so this is like the Zen Buddhism. As Zen is to Buddhism, Sufism is to Islam. It's a kind of Islam, but it's very meditative. It's very spiritual. It's all about embracing the mystery. It's all about knowing that the only thing we know is that we know nothing, right? And that we are just doing our best to interpret the world, and that we don't quite have the senses necessary to understand fully what's going on, right? We're limited by the physical senses that we have to understand the mystery of the reality of the world. That was a lot, but it's relevant because I think that having this embodied belief that nothing anyone knows is for sure, I think having that embodied belief it kind of gives me an edge and makes it a little easier for me to embrace my students' different ways of knowing and believing and thinking. It helps, it keeps me humble. Tarof is this kind of comical, competitive kindness that the Persians do. One example of this, I think, in American culture is the people arguing over the bill. when you go out to dinner together. I'll get it. No, I'll get it. Oh, you got it last time. So there's this little bit of bickering. In Iran, this will come to fist fights. Like people will really fight over who gets to be the most polite. You know, if there's a tray of tea, if there's a tray of chai at the party, there's going to be one left over because nobody's going to take that last one. People are just going to argue over who's taken that last glass of tea. This almost aggressive, this like aggressive kindness has really shaped the way that I am willing to bend to my students. And I know that saying that probably raises a lot of red flags with like, what do you mean bend to your students? I have very high expectations for my students. My assessments are very rigorous. My assignments are very rigorous. My attendance policy is like, it's set. And I love my kids, right? So this tarofing, this generosity, this kindness means that I will give them the benefit of the doubt. I will believe them when they say they have an emergency. I will prioritize kindness and warmth, and this feeling of teacher as auntie instead of teacher as boss is very core to my style in the classroom. And lastly, I think the easiest to apply to the arts is that Persian culture is heavy with symbolism, metaphor, poetry, and mysticism. We have national like poetry competitions the way that, you know, people play football here. It's very serious. We take our symbolism very serious. This has undoubtedly played a role in my desire to be an artist, and I hope to give my students the same eye for a deeper meaning everywhere. So now I'd like y'all to reflect. And it's not a huge group, so maybe we can even share and discuss. But I would like you to first just reflect and add some thoughts in the chat about how your own deep culture shows up in the classroom. How do your core ideologies shape the way that you carry yourself as a teacher? I also would encourage folks to reflect on cultural sustenance. How can you facilitate cultural sustenance and this is a big fancy word for like multiple ways of knowing and being in the world with your students. So how can you allow and facilitate that with your kids? I'm going to leave this up, or actually I'm going to leave this up because I think it's a handy visual resource. And just think for a couple minutes. So I'm going to leave this slide up for maybe one more minute. I love that. Loving what's in the chat already. And welcome, librarians, welcome. You are a curator, after all. Beautiful. Yeah, so that collaborative learning from your students as they learn from you. And I love Candido's connection to the auntie approach, and getting to teach in the same community that you grew up in is such a gift. Kids as teacher and friend. We learn and observe as a team. Relationships and rigor. I like that phrase. That's great. Choice and expression. Fashion. I love that. Cool. Okay, so I just have this and one last short slide. So I feel like most of y'all maybe already know my work, but if you don't, like, you can find it all on this QR. Leave this up for a second. And then I also just wanted to invite folks, anyone who is an art educator, who is BIPOC, a member of the global majority. I also wanted to share this event. I'm trying to flip the slide. The Adding Voices Conference. This is happening in November 8th through 10th, and it's an art education conference centering, it's by and for people of the global majority. So please snap that. Okay.